Good evening, everybody. You doing well? Yeah? Welcome to the American Library in Paris. And thank you for joining us tonight for Evenings with an Author, sponsored by Grow at Annenberg. My name is Mayanne Wright, and I'm the docent here at the library, and I also help out with these evening programs. How many of you are new to the library and you've never been here before? Wow. Wow. We are the largest English language lending library on the European continent, and we're over 100 years old. I bet you didn't know that. And tonight we are delighted to welcome Fernanda Eberstadt, I'll get it right, and Benjamin Moser to discuss Fernanda's book, Bite Your Friends, a memoir, I'm sorry, I'm a little tired tonight, a subversive memoir, how's that? And a mesmerizing history of the body as a site of resistance to power. The conversation will run about 45 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions for you here in the audience and the people on Zoom. So shall I tell you a little bit more about our guests here? Fernanda was born in New York City. She has published 5 novels and 1 work of nonfiction, a memoir about her friendship with a family of raw musicians in southern France. She has written for publications including the New York Times Magazine, The New Yorker, the London Review of Books, Vogue, and Granta, and is the editor-at-large for the European Review of Books. And Benjamin Moser is the author of Why This World, a biography of Clarice Lispector, a finalist for the National Book Critics Award, and a New York Times notable book of 2009. He also received Brazil's, I like this, first state prize for cultural diplomacy for his work bringing Clarice Lispector to international prominence. Let's see, for his biography, Sontag, Her Life and Work, he won the Pulitzer Prize. Benjamin's latest book, The Upside Down World, Meeting with Dutch Masters, was published in October 2023. And Benjamin spoke here at the library about that book, and if you would like to watch the replay, you can find it on our YouTube channel. Yeah. So will you please join me in welcoming our distinguished guests tonight with a warm round of applause. Thank you. And I hand it over to you.
Is this on? No. Should be. This one. Here we go. Good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's so much fun to be here with one of my truly unvarnishedly favorite humans, whom I've known for almost 25 years, I guess, something like that. I was a kid working in a publishing house in London, and her book, The Furies, was coming out in what was like 2001 or 2000, something like that.
Post 9/11.
Yeah. And she and I just, sometimes you read a book and you just are friends with that person, even though that person doesn't necessarily know that. But we actually did become friends because we got to work on the book together and do a lot of stuff together. And ever since, we've, always been in touch. And it's great to be able to introduce you in this book, which to me, we'll talk a lot about it. But maybe would you like to first start off reading a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to read a section just to give people a sort of sense of it. And I'm going to pick a section towards the beginning that gives a kind of flavor of it's a book that has a lot of lives of different characters, historical, present day, who use their bodies in different forms higher up. Thanks, Rachel. So I'm gonna read a section about one of these characters who is a friend of mine. A short section. Gutter art. This is a story about New York in the 1970s. Nowadays, the 70s seems like this idyll of pre-gentrification anarchy. But at the time, it felt like a scuzzy and derivative era, as if the revolutionary optimism of the 60s had soured and been succeeded by this cynical age of synths and polyester. I was 14 years old, and my best friend was a 28-year-old costume artist named Stephen Varble. I was in the 9th grade at an all-girls school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and at that point, Stephen Varble was the only boy I knew. For almost 3 years, we explored the seedier undersides of the city together. He introduced me to cocaine and kissing and the leather bars of the West Side Highway, and to drag queen stars like Ruth, Truth, and Divine, and I provided him grudgingly with something approaching home. We charmed, wounded, infuriated each other, squabbled and made up. But even in our most exasperated moments, we each had this weird faith in our friendship as a kind of artistic endeavor. I interviewed Stephen about his work, recorded in my diary every conversation. Stephen commissioned a photographer friend to make a video piece of the two of us, of which only 2 stills survive. He called me nonfiction. Later I went off to college and stopped answering Stephen's letters. Later he became a religious recluse, got AIDS, and died. Later he was forgotten because his art was so militantly ephemeral, and because most of the photographers who documented his performances also died of AIDS-related illness and were forgotten. And I too forgot about Stephen, because by then I was trying hard to bury my rackety youth and become a respectable citizen. It's taken me 40-odd years to be able to begin to think once again about Stephen, about our friendship, in a time of wild, unsurveilled freedom and experimentation. It's Easter Sunday, 5th Avenue. The year is 1975. By the 70s, the Easter parade's gone from being a New York high society ritual to carnival kitsch. Couples wearing Easter bonnets the size of grand pianos, triplets in hot pink lace, tap dancing outside St. Patrick's Cathedral. I'm crossing 5th Avenue at 59th, a pale, baby-faced adolescent dressed in a sailor's pea jacket and white canvas keds. I'm cutting across the tail end of the Easter parade on my way home from seeing Buñuel's Phantom of Liberty at the Paris Theatre. The Paris, cater-cornered to the Plaza Hotel, had a side entrance you could sneak through if you were broke or underage. I used to go to the movies a lot on my own. I did a lot of things by myself as a kid. There was some damage in me that meant I found other people's company exhausting. I thought it was my business to be solitary, a watcher, that was what writers were. The Easter parade is winding down when I spot him, her, them, the apparition. The apparition is a bearded young man, chalky white except for the lavender and pink eye makeup. He's wearing a headdress of half-burnt wooden matches, crowned by a souvenir matador and bull, and a gown made of golden Seagram's whiskey labels. He's on the arm of a mustachioed cowboy in black leather, and he's performing this silent movie pantomime. A small crowd surrounds him. Thing is, I know him already. A month earlier, I'd spotted the apparition at a benefit for Tibet at St. Mark's in the Bowery, drifting up the aisle in a white wool cassock. Odder still, I'm carrying a newspaper photo of him in my wallet. I don't yet know his name, but already he's in there with my hottest fetishes. I know we belong together in some way. I passed the leather cowboy my newspaper clipping, and now the apparition's doing her tricks just for me. "What's your name, little girl?" she whispers in this southern drawl. She's surprised to see a kid like me at the Easter parade. It used to be real festive, but now it's all riff-raff. Her voice hiking up to a gargled shriek. She's right. The mood's turned hostile. A gang of Puerto Rican or maybe Dominican men has moved in, catcalling, baiting. A soda can is thrown, just misses. The 2 policemen watching don't do a thing. This random violence from strangers will become familiar to me, tripping along the streets of Lower Manhattan, the Rockaways, worst of all Staten Island, arm in arm with this bearded man dressed in ball gowns made of garbage. It's part of the perspectival whiplash entailed when you fall in with someone from the wrong side of the socio-sexual tracks. The apparition, unfazed, bats her eyelashes at this jeering circle of males, except that suddenly she and the cowboy have disappeared down a subway entrance, and me along with them. We're on a downtown train, and the apparition is taking me home to his. Stephen Varble had been in New York 6 years when we met. He came from Owensboro, Kentucky. Stephen's family were stalwarts of the Audubon Church of the Nazarene. His father had some kind of real estate business, and Stephen was a mama's boy, but he must have known pretty early he had to hightail it to a big city. He arrived in New York with $7 and a pretty face, he told me. He waited tables at the ice cream parlor Serendipity and supposedly was fired for performing stripteases for the customers, but also got his master's in film from Columbia. By the time we met in the spring of 1975, Stephen was practicing what he described as gutter art, street performances and costumes concocted from materials he found in the dumpster. In Stephen's most famous action, he flounced into a branch of Chemical Bank wearing a gown made of dollar bills with breasts formed by twin condoms filled with fake blood. Shrieking that someone had forged $1 million check in his name and he wanted the money back. Now! 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 Stephen exploded his condom breasts like a gender jihadi and began writing checks with the blood. What do you do with an artist whose politics are expressed with such whimsical coquettishness that you could mistake his assault on capitalism and the art industry for mere camp? We are sitting on the M train, me, Stephen in his golden Easter parade gown, and the leather-clad cowboy, headed back to Stephen's studio on Delancey Street. Stephen is promising to take me to his favorite place for dinner, an Indian restaurant on each 6th, where they serve pomegranate cocktails that make you scream, he says, letting out a ladylike caterwaul. It's our first date. I am quietly soaring. It's one of those moments when a person thinks, my real life, the life I've always dreamed of, has just begun.
So as you said, this section about Stephen Varble, which is incredibly moving, because not to fill in the rest, but you know, you go off, you go abroad,
Yeah.
and you basically dump him.
I dump him. Yeah, I dump him. I ghost him. I ghost him. Yeah.
And then he dies, and then there's this moment that I think all of us have had with the internet where you think, I wonder what happened to so-and-so, and you Google them, and it says so-and-so obituary or something. And but this book, to me, it's almost 50 years on, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the kind of art that he practiced, which seemed kind of ridiculous and kind of gutter, is that what his word was?
Yeah, gutter art is what he called it.
Gutter art.
Yeah.
But it strikes me this book is all about, the word I kept thinking about was trans. It's transgender, it's trans class, it's transnational, it's all these people who are trying to escape some of the circumstances that they're saddled with and trying to reinvent themselves in these very brutal ways. And I think the person that, just a little intro to the book is about a lot of figures who don't seem to be related to each other, except through your sensibility.
Yeah.
But actually, once you see them, you're attracted to extremes. You're attracted to people and to experiences that, as we were saying, a lot of people didn't survive these experiences. Actually, of all the people that I knew who did these sorts of things, whether it was drugs or whether it was other forms of self-reinvention.
That's the polite word, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't make it, and you made it, and you were attracted from the time you were very young to these extreme forms of not you-ness.
Yeah.
But you're still here.
Doesn't Rachel Kushner write something about that, which I thought was beautiful in her book of essays, The Hard Crowd, and where she says the writer is always the one who left the party early.
Yeah.
So I think, she's someone else who's got that thing, who really likes to go into the gutter, down the dark alley, into the really dangerous places. But there's sort of like something. The person who watches, the person who writes, is holding back something. So I think what I found was, even at my most extreme times, when I was going to Studio 54 till 4 a.m, I'd come home, and at 4:30 I'd start writing about it in my diary. Yeah. So there's some kind of holding back.
But not everybody manages that, and the person that I'm thinking of is, of course, your mother. Her mother was the daughter of Ogden Nash, who was the famous sort of poet of witty verse.
Yeah.
That a lot of people, some of the first poems I ever knew were Ogden Nash, and she doesn't really make it. She remakes herself quite brutally into this. I think you have a line where you said she was described as author, socialite. No, it's socialite, author, and daughter. And you say, if she hadn't been stuck between socialite and daughter, and she had been more author, I'm paraphrasing this terribly, it's much better than that, but basically she's someone who's struggling to get out of these roles, and she fails. Can you talk about her a little bit?
My mother, I think, she made it literally. She survived, but I think it was kind of maybe a little crushing. Ogden Nash was such a big deal, such a famous poet. It was probably hard being his child and trying to be a writer yourself. She got married at 20, 21. She got married at 20, had my brother at 21. She couldn't, my father wanted her to be a kind of society hostess. He was a fashion photographer, and I think they were sort of ambivalent about professional life. So she published 2 books 25 years apart, was a very blocked writer, had a lot of problems, that she was very open about, with manic depression and other illnesses that I write about a lot. So I think she sort of, she accomplished, some things. She was not the writer that she dreamed of being. But I think, and she definitely survived, and she probably had a lot of her friends didn't too, because she was also drawn to extremes in underground art and other flamboyant characters. So I think that was sort of an example. I think her example was sort of like how, don't let your private life get too fascinating. Get more colorful. Don't get your social life be more colorful than your professional life. Yeah.
Well, a lot of what she becomes well known for, and there's a lot of pictures in the book that are really beautiful of her mother and with Yves Saint Laurent and all these very famous people from New York and from Paris, and it all looks just wonderful. But one of the things that comes back in all these stories that you tell that are all interconnected is there's a lot about clothes. And there's also a lot about how clothes deform the body, which I find fascinating, and how at a certain point, for Stephen Varble, but also for your mother, and also for some of we'll get to the ancient Roman saints in a minute, but how clothes almost eat into your body like acid.
Wow, that's a beautiful idea.
Well, that's your idea.
Is it?
But how all these people are sort of made and unmade by the surfaces that they present.
Yeah. I think there's a definite sort of conflict between looking and being looked at, and I think the more you get into performance and being looked at, being an object, being observed, the harder it is to create, or else you got to drug yourself. You got to drug yourself silly to get up there.
Now, one thing not everybody might know about this person is that she was very close to Andy Warhol when you were, 14 also? 16.
Yeah.
Who, of course, is the ultimate symbol of that, of kind of subsuming whatever real person you are into this role and into this performance. But he, it somehow feels more painful the way you describe it. You seem to have been attracted to even more extreme forms of self-annihilation.
Yeah.
Did you ever, but you left the party early. Mm-hmm. But one of the weirdest things about you, which I totally forgot, there's so much weirdness, I'm telling you. She's so interesting. And this book is so great because you really see like how these extreme forms of reinvention. I didn't know this, that after being the coolest girl in Manhattan for like 5 years until you went to college, you became like an ultra-Zionist neocon.
Yeah, I did. I did.
Fascinating.
And when I got out of university, I sort of came back to New York and felt, and really hit the skids. And I think it's sort of funny. I have one brother who's 5 years older, and we both we grew up in this unbelievably cool, glamorous world with no rules, no bedtime, no boundaries, no nothing. And we both sort of experienced exactly the same desperation for authority, rules, structure. And he he kind of introduced me to neoconservative politics. And so I guess for about sort of 8 years I was a neocon and wrote, which meant being sort of born again, Reaganite, neoconservative, Zionist, studied biblical Hebrew. I write about that a little bit, and published articles slamming writers I thought were too liberal or not sufficiently anti-communist. It was the good side about it for me afterwards was, it was a very, very sort of ecstatic time of feeling absolute meaning, absolute everything making sense. And afterwards, when I sort of came out the other side, I think it gave, it made me understand extremism because I had been an extremist. I totally understand zealotry. Of any kind, whether it's sort of Trumpian, whether it's kind of like born-again Islam, whatever it is, I totally feel
you were a
attraction.
Jesus freak before you became an Orthodox Jew, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like you really, you
spanned
spanned the whole,
I've always, until I don't know when, been searching for extreme meaning, extreme purpose, extreme sacrifice. I totally see it. And since we are in a polarized age, it kind of helps knowing what that feels like, being part of a mass, maybe not tiny mass movement, and really this sort of glorifying, ecstatic thrill of purpose, and also of sort of like, I mean sacrifice. I mean the idea, something a little with more bite to it than consumer.
No, you're not cold coffee. You're the full bottle of whiskey. You get the attraction to that. And at a certain point when you start writing about these early Christian saints, and those parts, actually I didn't know the earliest, because I'm a biographer, the earliest biography of a woman is written, I think, or the earliest autobiography was written by a Christian woman in ancient Rome who was about to be thrown to the beasts. So when you started writing this book, because I remember when you wrote the Varble piece, which was incredible, and I remember really well just thinking, it's a gut punch of a chapter. But was this idea of sacrifice and of extreme experience and the seeking of the absolute something that you started out thinking about when you started this book? Or did it just, were you aware of that side of yourself? Or did it come out as you were writing this? No,
I didn't know that's what I was doing. There were a couple of sort of disparate strands of it. I wrote a long piece for the Times Magazine about this Russian artist, Pyotr Pavlansky, who's an extreme body artist, who's kind of most famous for when he was still living in Putin's Russia, for stripping naked, sitting in the middle of Red Square in the winter, and driving a sort of crucifixion-style nail through his scrotum as a sort of protest embodiment of sort of Russian passivity in the face of tyranny. So I did a profile of him, which involved spending a lot of time with him. By then he had asylum in France, him and his partner and their kids. I was very, very drawn to sort of his extreme body art and his acts of absolute sort of self-mastery and sort of athletic, almost sort of athletic, heroic sacrifice in doing things that are, made people literally want to throw up. I was writing about Pussy Riot. I was so, Russian sort of anti-Putin activists. I didn't quite see how it all fit together. I wasn't thinking of a book, and actually what sort of, I think what the common thread wasn't anything autobiographical. It was thinking about how a sort of connection between contemporary body artists and early Christian martyrs. So I suddenly started thinking about the line, that line between early Christian martyrs and people who did horrible things to their bodies as a form of sort of conceptual art today.
I wrote a book about Susan Sontag, and there's a moment that's a great moment when she goes to Sarajevo in the 90s, which is under siege, and the question for her, she puts on a play in the middle of this slaughter. I mean, it's totally crazy, and if you've ever been to Sarajevo, you know that it's actually very, like, she could have been killed at any moment. And the takeaway that was a question that she had asked herself since she was a little girl, when she literally was prepared to die for Igor Stravinsky, was, is art worth dying for?
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm asking you the question. Give us a...
Is art worth dying for? I mean, yeah. I think probably, a lot different things are worth dying for. But I think, yeah. Always. And what she would, I think her going to Sarajevo, I kind of remember it at the time because people were thinking, is that just being kind of showboaty?
That's what most people say.
Yeah,
oh, she's showing off. She's trying to get in the New York Times.
And then I sort of read, I didn't go to Sarajevo, and then I sort of heard that that sort of Bosnians who were there, it's saved their lives. It just sort of made them feel people cared about them, and somebody who they admired cared about them. So that was an incredibly brave thing to do. Yeah.
But all these people in your book, not all of them, but a lot of them do die. Mm-hmm. A lot of them don't make it. And they've left a kind of legacy that I think that you piece together, this religious feeling that's subsumed into art, starting, really earlier, but really in the 70s it gets going. And I had a little line from Sontag I wanted to read you about Michel Léry, since we're in Paris, who is one of the great thinkers about this subject, and it's from his essay. It's called Literature Considered as a Bullfight. And it says, this is Sontag, Léry must feel, as he writes, the equivalent of the bullfighter's knowledge that he risks being gored. Only then is writing worthwhile. But how can the writer achieve this invigorating sense of mortal danger? Léry's answer is through self-exposure, through not defending himself, not through fabricating works of art, objectifications of himself, but through laying himself, his own person, on the line of fire. But we, the readers, the spectators of this bloody act, know that when it is performed well, think of how the bullfight is discussed as a preeminently aesthetic ceremonial act, it becomes, whatever the disavowals of literature. So when your experiences of, I have to say the most shocking descriptions in this book are of bullfighting. And actually, I just want to say, it's not all blood and gore, this book. It really isn't. It's really actually a great book because it shows you leaving the party, as it were, and thinking about these questions. But like, when you, do you feel that in your own work, have you skirted the edge as much as you would like to?
That's a great question. I think one one of the things with this book, I feel that this book is the one where I really went into it, where I really went down into the abyss, and really sort of, or onto the bullfight arena. I feel like I think I reached a certain point with my fiction where I felt I hit a wall, and I was kind of it was decorative, it was pretty, it was ornamental, but I wasn't going there. I was kind of skirting. So this book, which is the first kind of hard, not the first non-fiction, second non-fiction book, but it's the one where I kind of put myself on the line, and I only did it because I felt I'd sort of run out of alternatives, that I'd kind of dried up, and I wasn't getting anywhere. So that book is sort of really, really, really it, and now I can't go back. I'm sort of starting the next book, and I'm thinking I can't. I tell myself every day I got to write one sentence that's true, just one sentence that's true, and not do beautiful imagery and evasion. So it's sort of that's the only thing I want. If I write 10 pages for the rest of my life, it's got to be true. It's got to be going deep, absolute, into the deep sort of raw core of being of my truth anyway. Yeah. What about you? How does that? I mean, you're doing biographies.
There's a story, Clarice Lispector, who I wrote my first book about.
Yeah.
She gave one of her stories to a friend of hers to read, a short story, and he said it was so hard to read. It was made entirely of intestines.
Ooh.
So anyway, I hope I'm not putting people off this book by saying it's all intestines, but it really is. It has that characteristic of rawness and of truth that really I find so much writing now doesn't. I mean, we were talking earlier, like so much of the stuff that's come out in our generation has been really just kind of boring, and it doesn't seem like anybody is going to get their dick nailed to the pavement, right? Yeah. And like not everything has to go in that direction, but like but it is really invigorating in a way to think about it. But another way, you don't have to do that. And one thing that, since we're here, and since a lot of us are people who've left our countries and come here or come somewhere else, one of the ways that you sort of explore the transnational thing is you leave America really young, and you come to Europe, and you're still here.
Yeah, that was something pretty crucial. I had to get away. I had to get away from home, and I knew. I think my family life was sort of too entrancing and too wonderful and too intoxicating. My wonderful parents, and I had to get out, and I had to get out of America. And the strange thing was, my world was books, and my world was children's books, and like a lot of kids, but it was a geographical thing. It was England. It was English children's books. So I thought there was this place, which was the English children's book, where I could go live. And the crazy thing was, it was true. I went to London first, when I was 17, and lived in a boarding house and was taking, exams to get into university. I did get there. I stayed. I felt, I met my people. I think I always felt there were people, I was looking for people. I was looking for soulmates. And I thought there were people, there were living human people who I would find, who cared about the same stuff as me and was reading the same stuff as me. And there were, and who were reading much better stuff than me too. And I did find them. So when I got to England and when I got to university, that was when I sort of did find my people, and I didn't ever want to go back to America.
And then you met somebody who had to leave England.
Yes. I met somebody who felt exactly the same way about England, who felt almost worse than I did, who's sitting in the front row here. That meant that we couldn't live in England, we couldn't live in America, which is why why we came to wonderful France, because we each had terrible demons we had to escape. You too. This is one of the things we have in common is, we each were sort of searching for otherness and, getting away from the U.S.
Yeah, I never felt I was necessarily getting away as much as I was going somewhere else.
Yeah,
I didn't have a negative thing. I still don't. I mean, I know everybody now thinks it's crazy that I'm not totally repulsed, but it wasn't that much better when I was a kid as a political reality. But I think you come here, and it is a way that you transform yourself and you kind of declare independence from this. It's interesting that you would, I'm thinking of you in a Beatrix Potter cottage, after coming from a leather bar on the West Side Highway. It is a kind of interesting fantasy to have, isn't it? Because you're so attracted to this, but you're also so attracted, and then you come to France, and I know you live in a very beautiful, birds tweeting, lavender scented corner of France.
Yeah.
You also, did you think that you needed that as a writer? You needed that kind of, because it's not quite otherness, it's more stability.
Yeah. I think, what I've always found, which is kind of a cheat, is I need a lot of refuge. I need very, very thick walls where nobody can get at me, to explore the kind of. I mean, I need to. I say it's a cheat because I sort of will go out to dangerous, extreme places and sort of seek a lot of excitement, darkness, marginal stuff, but then I need to come home to something very, very, very safe, very, very quiet, very sheltered, where nobody can get at me. Is it easy? That's not necessarily sort of Europe versus America, but it's a lot of protection. So I rely on a lot of refuge.
Yeah, I mean, you would have to have done the things that you've done and to have achieved the things that you've done. I just wanted to ask if maybe you would talk for just a second about the title.
Oh, okay. So, Bite Your Friends. The kind of godfather of this book is this cynic philosopher Diogenes, who is, the dog man, who is a contemporary of Plato's, who lived. He slept rough, slept in the marketplace, lived in a barrel, had this sort of ethic, this philosophy of doing everything in public, in the marketplace, in the street, eating, sex, sleeping, and a kind of ethic of anti-materialism, anti-power. And one of the great things about Diogenes is nothing he wrote survives. It's all oral, an oral tradition of things he said. And he's called the cynic philosopher, so dog philosopher, and he he's one of his sayings was, "I bite my friends to cure them." So my original title for the book was "I Bite My Friends," but the idea is that a figure like that is sort of a savage, out of control person who sort of draws you to attention by his kind of his violence. He sort of,
and then you change it into the imperative.
Yeah,
Bite
we've all got to do it. Yeah,
yeah.
we all got to do it. Yeah, it's not just me. We all got to do it. We all got to bite our friends. We've got to wake each other up, tell each other what's what we see as the truth, and not let each other get away with deceptions and easy answers. Yeah.
And I just actually, I totally forgot this, or I would have called you about it. But I've just written something about Peter Hujar, whom I know.
No way, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
whoa.
I forgot to. I was supposed to bring it.
Oh, wow. What is it?
It's Portraits in Life and Death, which has just been reissued for the first time since 1975.
So will you just tell people about Peter Hujar?
So yeah, Peter Hujar was a friend of hers, not a friend of mine, because he died in 1987,
About
I
12.
think. Yeah, something. And he was a famous photographer who sort of the Stephen Varble age, you know, and of this, although he was very much, he wasn't about like wearing dresses made of trash. I mean, he was this incredibly refined poet of a photographer, really. But he also inhabited this world of extreme marginality.
Yeah.
Extreme. I mean, Fran Lebowitz was saying the other night that, you know, she didn't actually know anyone who had less than Peter. Like, he was a destitute person. And there were a lot of these people. I have this funny kind of, you know, I've contributed to this because, you know, I've got to make a living. But this beautiful new publication, this book costs $75. It's all printed in some, you know, Milanese, like, elegant printing place, and it looks just fabulous. And now I see that there's this real interest in this art of the 70s. But everything that can't be commodified in that way has kind of fallen by the wayside. I mean, do you think that Stephen Varble, all of his work disappeared, he disappeared, you wrote about all these other people around him who all were forgotten, all the generation of AIDS. What do you think is the legacy of that for us now?
Yeah. So the direct Stephen Varble thing was he and Peter Hujar were lovers, and that action I mentioned where he went into a chemical bank with breasts made out of condom pumped up with fake blood, that was photographed by Peter Hujar. So actually there's a picture in the book by Peter Hujar. You know, photographers are lucky. Their legacy is sort of is more survivable. But anybody, you know, there's so many artists, especially from the 70s, who on purpose specialize in things that were ephemeral. Performances, any performance artist is sort of working in the ephemeral. I think that's a sort of deliberate, you know, that's a deliberate ethic. But I feel like, you know, so I mentioned Pyotr Pavlensky, who does these actions, you know, stripping naked in Red Square. In a way, it's kind of not a fake exactly, but, you know, what he does live has no existence. It wouldn't look like anything. You'd be a block away or you'd be nearby and you wouldn't be able to see what he was doing. So it only survives, that kind of performance art only survives by the person he's kind of hired to photograph him up close and put it out on social media. I've got huge admiration for those sort of deliberately ephemeral artists, performance artists. You know, Adrienne Piper is one of them. I mean, her stuff does get cataloged, but people who really, really, really are making stuff that's sort of designed to disappear. That's its own kind of beautiful ethic. And I feel as if that kind of got invented. I don't know about nothing gets invented ever, but in the 70s, that was kind of like the thing, not anti-monumental.
Well, it's so funny how it's been so romanticized, and I feel that the appeal of these artists and of these lives, because ultimately it is sort of life as project, life as artwork, person who becomes something that, you know, like Stephen Varble's this kid from the Nazarene Church of Owensboro, Kentucky. Like, he wasn't supposed to be an ephemeral artwork in Soho, like going up in flames, you know, like, he made himself that. And I feel like it's so inspiring. I mean, I know we've gotten there's a lot of fake blood, there's a lot of real blood that we've been talking about, but it's actually an incredibly inspiring legacy. When you read about this stuff, you think like, I want to be a pain in the ass.
Oh, I'm really glad you said that. Oh, yeah, I'm really, really glad you said that. I think you know, in this book, there's a really big strand, and there's a really big thread, and that I think is I really want to talk about, you know, which is bravery. you're talking about Susan Sontag going to Sarajevo. Stephen Varble, I think the bravest thing Stephen Varble ever did was go back to Kentucky. And I've got a friend who wrote it, who's sort of written about him academically. He went back. He went back to Owensboro with his costumes. He paraded them through the streets in the 1970s.
You say at some point every time he walked out of his house, he was inviting violence.
Yeah. People would come after him, throwing bottles.
Yeah.
So the people who dare to be a pain in the ass.
Can I just connect that bottle to one thing, and then I think we're going to ask. I think we're about going to questions in a minute. But speaking of bottles, this is something I just loved, and this is so her for me. It's so you. The purpose of philosophy is, quote, to show the fly how to get out of the fly bottle, Wittgenstein says. The prophets you will encounter in these pages are the ones who prefer to smash the bottle.
Yeah.
So now it's over to you.
Questions. And that was a beautiful way to bring it all together.
Good.
All right, who has a question?
Please do also wait for the microphone because we're having people on Zoom watching, so they won't hear you.
And be brave.
Yeah.
Be brave. Bernard.
Thank you. Well, you said that art is something to die for. Well, earlier on, I was reminded of an episode of my own life. 25 years ago, yeah, I know, I'm a lot older than I look. Well, on a TV show on CNN where I was a regular, I had a chance to ask a question, well, to Isaac Stern, the famous musician. Well, during the first Gulf War in 1991, he was playing in Tel Aviv, Israel, and there were many alerts because scouts could fall on Tel Aviv any time on Israel, Iraqi scouts that was, and the civil defense units were telling people to have gas masks ready at hand. And there was one of these alerts occurred when Stern was on stage, and then he refused to stop playing, and he even refused the gas mask. He continued to play, like nothing was happening. And then I told him, you were so brave, and he said, no, nonsense, I was not brave. And I asked him a question, well, do you think that music and art, music can bring peace and tolerance and harmony in the world? And he said something wonderful. I wanted to share it with you. Well, he said, if governments worked like orchestras, there would be a lot more peace and harmony in the world. But if orchestras worked like governments, no one would hear a single note anymore. You see, so I have a question for you. Well, in this day and age, it looks like politicians everywhere are becoming more managers, you see, whereas some politicians, we used to have, such as here in France, like Georges Pompidou, were really into art. So would you say that in this day and age, anyone who is not into art, deep enough, anyone who does not really understand the soul of people or of voters should be, if not disqualified, at least severely distrusted? What's your take on this?
As politicians? Yeah. They seem to me pretty separate arts. That's a beautiful thing of Isaac Stern. I think there's so many ways of being a good politician, very few of which we're seeing on display at the moment. Tons of different ways. Listening's a good start. Yeah, I think the art of government is first of all, I think there's the idea that it is an art, that there that it's a form of expertise and is a great thing. But I don't think Isaac Stern would be a better president than the ones necessarily who can't be worse, but than the ones we're getting. So yeah, different realms. I mean, we had the Czech Republic had a playwright that was.
He was good.
He was good.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about and what?
A pianist.
Yeah. What about you, Ben? Have you got a?
Have I got to say to that? I mean, no. not really. I feel like so many people, they are separate things, and I think that the idea that culture can refine people is not true. I think we've seen so many examples of that. I think that there's something real about evil in the world and something real about evil in humanity that you can read a lot of books and you're still going to invade Poland, you know? So there's something it's a very liberal idea, right? That people can be civilized. And I think we've seen time and time again, it just doesn't work. So.
Yeah.
Hi, Nina.
Hey, Becky.
So I was just going to say that the poison, the bite of the poison is the potion, I guess, that cures. But I was also going to say that in the 1970s, there were so many fewer artists. Soho, there was nobody in Soho. I mean, it wasn't Soho the way we think of Soho. It was just kind of quiet. And I want to come back to this question of the ephemeral, because it was easier for things to be ephemeral when things weren't being recorded so much, when there wasn't so much photography and so much film. It's like now anybody's got a camera in their pocket and things could, it's just the multiplication of images and film. So this question of the ephemeral, I find, is fascinating.
Yeah. So you think
can anything be ephemeral now that we have all these recording?
Everything is filmed. And the other thing is, I was listening to a recording of Ellen Sixou, who is, of course, the great Clarice Lispector lover, and she talks about literature, that the only books that are really important are it's what you were saying, the ones where it's the bullfight, it's the... I'll find that passage for you.
Yeah.
Someone else? Rachel?
The lady in the Bordeaux sweater?
Thank you. Thank you both so much for this extremely thought-provoking and engaging conversation. In this book, you write really beautifully about your mother and her own body betraying her when she has many different illnesses and sicknesses and issues that she's grappling with. You write also a little bit about yourself. When you hit puberty, you say that your body betrays you and that suddenly men are trying essentially to harass you. You talk a little bit about Pussy Riot. For the most part, the characters in this book are men, mostly gay men. Foucault, his sex life, Pasolini, Pavlensky, who's, I don't think, gay, and these extreme acts. And I wonder if so much in even the most boring heteronormative woman's life, every stage is a basic political battle. And I wonder what draws you to these men dealing with rather extreme versions of sexuality. Is there a connection between those two realities for you? I'm not suggesting you should have written a different book. I think this is extremely engaging, but I just wonder why go this way?
Yeah, I know. I think that's a good question. I think what I sort of write about on this sort of longer version of that Stephen Varble thing is just this weird quirk of mine, which is that from the time I was a little kid, I sort of identified with gay men. I felt like I felt like a gay man. And one of the things I do write about is it took me. I hated being in a girl's body. I really wanted to be a boy. So I think that is, that's a sort of frailty. That's a frailty that I'm sort of that I'm dealing with, and I wouldn't. I felt what I write about is that it's really only that I have a lot of problems living in a woman's body. It's only when I get pregnant, when I have children, that I come to, I don't want to make it sound sort of too simple, but that I come to really, really love having a woman's body. And I found it hard. I tried to write about that a bit, and I didn't want it to be sort of sound like too smug or too much a sort of instant cure, or be motherhood's a kind of tricky thing to write about. And on purpose, I kind of choose. I kind of admire these women, like these crazy women who, even though they do have little children, are willing to go to prison, like Pussy Riot, or the saints I write about who have just given birth and still sacrificed in the amphitheater. I feel too, I wrote too much about men in the book, and it sort of needed, I was thinking about women, strands of women that I didn't write about. I mean, also in the same kind of extreme and self-punishing or self-sacrificing way, which is, women, suffragists who sort of, did extreme actions to get the vote. So extreme kinds of feminism. And there isn't a lot of the everyday in the book, and there's only there's one section where I try to writing autobiographically, I write about sort of more everyday female transformation and shifts in the body. But next book. Yeah.